Chapter 5. An Enchanted Rat. Dark trudged home in the early hours of that Easter Saturday morning, hoping that Georgina wouldn't waken his mum by barking on his approach. He was now feeling very impressed with himself. The squad car would be arriving in the yard within a few hours. He would be arrested for the break-in. There would be nothing more he could do from there. And he was still no wiser as to how he might contact Long Moira, not to speak of figuring out the rest of the riddle. When Brian had finished the milking, Dark showed him what milk replacer and nuts were to be fed to each group of calves. "In case I'm not around to do it tomorrow," he said. Brian looked alarmed at that, but Dark didn't explain. By midday there was still no sign of the guards. He began to wish they would come, to get it over with and get on to whatever was next. The thought occurred to him that he was being dangled, suspended in mid-air like a trout flapping from a trace. Salty's sneer kept floating to the surface of his thoughts. The rest of the weekend was a confused time. Many of Connie's friends called. Some stayed to talk, tell stories that Connie barely registers, and to offer help. His mum told them all what the doctors had said. Connie was going to get better at home, as if repeating it often enough would make her believe it. She and Dark both could see that his retreat from them continued rapidly. The occasional teaspoon of custard and the company of those who cared about him were not going to stop that. At one point, Red arrived and insisted they try Connie's own concoction for very sick calves, a mix of blended nettle leaves, glucose and Red Bull. Dark wasn't so sure about that, especially not when the Red said it was killer cure time. Fortunately, Dark's mum wouldn't let him near Connie with the stuff, and the Red went away again, grumbling. Mammy Una called too. Una Moriarty. She was ancient with sickly breath and had taught Irish in Dark school for generations. She didn't stay long. After saying hello to Connie, she took Dark aside, saying, "And your mam, are you taking good care of her? She's a girl from outside and wouldn't be able for the kind of antics the McLean boys can get up to." Mammy Una often confused Dark for his father and called him Sean in class. He didn't care now what kinds of antics Sean and Connie had gotten up to when she had taught them 2 decades earlier. What the hell good was that kind of rambling talk to anyone now? As she let go of his hand and removed her gaze, she said, "It will be all right." He wished some of Connie's friends were able to offer something more useful than groundless reassurance. But he thanked the old woman. He remembered that Connie had always told him to be mindful of her. Stuff that Connie had said was starting to come back to him. According to Connie, good people come in surprising shapes and sizes. On Saturday evening, Kevin's number came up on his phone. He had forgotten that he was supposed to meet him in the park. He wondered if Ciara had been there too. He didn't take the call. Dark was not able to get away to the Rat over the rest of the weekend, as there were people around late. As he lay awake, he wondered whether Long Moira would someone he already knew. He was trying to think which local woman would fit. Long, slight and cranky. Not Queenie, she wasn't slight. Not Mammy Una, she was not long. Not his mum, as she was rarely cranky. When Tuesday morning came, he picked some of the white bits off his uniform. He had put it in the machine with a pocket of tissue. He got his school bag out from under the sofa. "I'm taking your bike, ma'am," he said, and didn't answer when she asked where his own was. For once, the normal drudge of a few hours in Mulla Community College seemed attractive, even though Ciara would be thinking him weird after the thing at the petrol station, and even though he was trying to avoid the thought that Ms. Sullivan, his maths teacher, was the only woman he knew who answered the description. If she was Moira Fada, her secret could remain with her. Miss Carmen Sullivan had declared early on that Arthur McLean was a wrong one. And once Miss Sullivan decided what you were, that was what you stayed. She saw her only job from there being to find additional proof for her theorem. After Connie had taught Dark algebra and she was no longer able to find questions to catch him out every day, she simply stopped asking him any. And after Connie had had a word with Principal Micheál, she had also stopped passing comments about his shoes or hair. Or anything, in fact. She had not spoken to Dark for a year. She still looked at him and nodded slowly as if to say, "You can't fool me, I know what you are." Dark was okay with that. He certainly had no intention of asking her something weird now that might win him back his role as the main object of her sarcasm. 2 hours later, Dark was slouched uncomfortably in his chair with his head on the desk when something poked his back very sharply. He looked around. At the desk behind him, Kira was looking down. Her set square fell off her desk. He kept looking at her until she lifted her head and laughed. It wasn't that Kira was unruly. She remained the best student in the class, but this was geography, and Buzzcock's class, everyone did pretty much what they wanted. Buzzcock had been somewhere abroad for years. He had a bush of grey hair and red ears that stuck straight out through it. He dressed like an old man, except that he wore a faded patchwork poncho that looked like some kind of 70s hippie thing. Buzzcock never touched on the geography syllabus. "I don't believe in it," he said. Instead, he told them stories about himself wandering through places in Asia and Africa. He was forgetful and often repeated, "Let me tell you, I used to be a right arrogant git. Thought I had everything else sussed. Isn't it strange, ladies and gentlemen, that I had to go to a faraway place, to Madagascar, to see who I was?" He talked vaguely about ancestor-centred religions, the mystical past, and other stuff that nobody had the remotest interest in. Occasionally he would bang the table and lecture them about the evils of mega corporations and people he called the Bilderberg elites, who were trying to control their brains. Most days, though, he would light a sweet afton and hang out of the window to talk to Trocora, the caretaker, who always seemed to have tidying jobs to do in the flower beds near Buzzcock's window. Buzzcock was all right. Today he was unusually alert. "Yes, Mr. McLean, are you feeling okay? You are looking particularly tired today." The bell went. The others left the room for a break. Buzzcock was shuffling around at the front desk, putting his lunchbox and a copy of Racing Post into his old leather satchel. Dark didn't know why it came into his head to stop and say to him, "Mr. O'Reilly, in Africa, did you ever, hear of birds that could talk?" Buzzcock looked at him, wary that he was being made fun of, which was the intention of most questions asked of any teacher in Dark's school. Dark added, "I don't mean mimicry, like the canaries and the African grey and all that." Buzzcock saw he was serious. He put down his bag and spoke slowly. "Well, not in Africa, but here. I have read in some of these old scripts that birds only stopped talking 900 years ago. They did so in protest at the arrival of Benedictine monks, who spread strict rules and lack of humour across the country. But you know, Arthur, I never heard of any evidence that the birds had lost their ability to talk." "Thanks, sir," said Dark, awkwardly, not sure whether he was glad he had asked. "See you later, sir." "Yes, my boy, I'll see you too," said the teacher, seemingly quite short of words for a change. Dark and a few of the usual lads went down to the Riverview Mall to hang around the shops during lunchtime. "We don't see you very often these days, Dark," said Sneakers Coogan. "You're usually gone before lunchtime." The others laughed. "I stay some days," Dark said. "Yeah, like when it's too wet to go fishing," said Coogan. "Who the feck else comes to school with a telescopic rod in their bag?" That wasn't it. Fishing was only one of his options on days when he had time to kill before he could show up at home. On rainy days he went to Davy Cash's place. Cash had a pony and various kinds of bantams. He had long stopped going to school altogether. "Don't get me wrong," said Sneakers. "That place doesn't work for me either. We'd all join you in a heartbeat except for the shitstorm it'd land us in. How do you get them to ignore you the way you do?" "You remember Cash?" said Dark. "After Sullivan became deputy head, she called him aside and told him they wouldn't care if he stopped coming. So of course he stopped, and they just stopped calling his name in the mornings. Well, it's like that with me. She all but wrote my name off the roll last year, and now she is just waiting for me to stop appearing." So give them a little bother and they hassle the hell out of you, said another lad. But give them a lot and they stop hassling you altogether. Is that it? I don't know, said Dark. In truth, he didn't think he'd ever given them all that much hassle. You're not an knacker though, Dark, said Sneakers, laughing. Unless there's something you're not telling us. Cash is my friend, was all Dark said. Nobody ever used the word knacker in Connie's presence. They knew better. Watch out, laughed one of the others. You're making him mad. You wouldn't like Dark when he's mad. Time passed as usual. Sneakers resumed throwing smart comments at people passing. The manager from the Spar came out to tell them to move, and they moved just a few feet without looking at him. Then, across the way, was Kira. She was walking in their direction. He had never seen her out of school at lunchtime before. She headed into Quirk's school books. The others hadn't noticed. He plucked up the courage and said to them, Lads, I forgot I have to buy a notebook and things. They looked at each other, surprised, and shrugged. He walked along the front of the shop, looking down the stuffy aisles. The woman at the till was eyeing him suspiciously, as if all shopkeepers knew about him now. She wasn't there. He thought she must have gone straight out the other door into Emmett Lane. Then he spotted her in the stationery corner at the back, just staring at the pens. He went over and stood next to her, saying, Hey. She didn't seem surprised that he was there at all. She must have seen him across the street after all. I persuaded my dad I needed new stationery. I like buying nice pens and pencils. Dark always felt a bit awkward away from the between-classroom environment that usually shaped their conversations. He hadn't anything to say, but he could feel her warmth even through the inches of space and the jackets that separated their shoulders. He pointed out one he thought looked okay. She just picked it and went and paid for it as if he knew one pen from another. Sorry about the other evening, he said, realising how stilted his rehearsed line was even as he was saying it. I had just got a text about an errand I needed to run. I have some money, she said. Do you maybe want to come for a coffee? Since it's not every day I have an excuse to come into town. Dark drank coffee in the morning. 2 heaped teaspoons from a Nescafe jar and a mug of boiling water to wake him up for his morning calf feeding. But he had never been for a coffee. Sneakers and the lads were more interested in trying to persuade him to go for lunchtime beer, as he looked the oldest, so they reckoned he'd be able to buy them bottles of Bavaria in the Emporium bar. They were walking slowly, near each other, and he got the courage to reach for her hand as they walked to the Spa Cafe at the back of Dunn's Stores. She didn't take her hand away. Neither of them said anything about it. She ordered a cappuccino, and he said, the same please, with a rock bun. He had forgotten to bring any lunch. The coffee machine was acting up, and by the time they got their cups, it was already nearly time to be heading back. It's only SPHE or something, they won't even miss us, said Dark, who had not been thinking of going back for the afternoon anyway. It's science. Won't we get in trouble? She said. They both knew the answer to that. She would, because they expected better of her. He wouldn't, because they didn't. No, I don't think so, he said. She seemed a bit nervous too, and talked without stopping. He was glad of that. He heard about her sister in London who was a high-flying actuary. Dark did not even know what that was. She spoke more about Dave, the retired goth brother who stayed in a flat in town with several other lads. They spent their dole on dope, beer, and stuff from the noble weed. Her father had locked the brother out. Her mother kept them all together and doted on Kira so openly that it embarrassed her. So what possessed you to move from the city to live in the wilds with your uncle? She asked. Why had he? He still didn't know how his mam had thought it was her only option. After Sean had died, the invite came to stay for as long as they wanted, in a place so remote that the Google Maps satellites did not even see it. An invite from a brother who people said had gone off the rails a bit and given up on archaeology job in the US to come back to the McLean farm. On reflection, not coping very well did not quite cut it for his mother's state back then. So they had come to live in a damp old flagstoned house with laggy signal and a local town that was smaller than the suburb he used to live in. He didn't ask why anymore, because he was no longer sorry. Connie had sorted out certain things for him at school and over time had brought back his mother's embarrassing giggle. "I don't know," said Dark. The time passed and they both knew that going back for Sullivan's maths lesson after science was not on. Ciara would have been too obvious walking in the school gates so late. She was tense. He texted Kevin and asked him to bring her bag out with him after school. And then she smiled and sat back and said, "But it's kind of nice. Even though I know I'm going to get in trouble later, this time is nice, the time before getting caught. Like stolen time." "Yeah," he said. "It was kind of like that." "But I still know nothing about your family," she said. "Not much to know," said Dark, feeling in a corner. "We're fairly average." "Arthur," she laughed. The way she said Arthur sounded nice. "Come on, I've seen your uncle and his amazing old Jeep." Dark realised that he had managed not to think about Connie all day, or about what could be wrong with them. It had been nice, like stolen time. "Average would hardly be the word that comes to anyone's mind when the Micheál name is mentioned," said Ciara. People at school still talked about Connie since the morning he had driven up to the office door in the Queen Mary. He had called Principal Micheál out into the yard for a chat. Connie's chats were always as loud as his laugh, so several people had heard him say, "Still the same old bullying lech, eh, Mags? Next time you have issues with our art, don't call Helen, call me." People remembered it because they had never before seen Micheál himself cower and slink away as his students did when leaving his grubby office. "A little larger than life," she said. "Would that be fair to say?" "I don't really know what that means," said Dark. Not larger than life now, he was thinking. Smaller than life. "I haven't seen your uncle for a while." "He's not very well at the moment," he said. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said. She tried to change direction. "Your mum. I only saw her a few times when you came here first. All the girls think she's stunning looking." "Things have been better," he said, looking back at her. She hadn't asked about his father. Maybe they all knew about that. "Well, is there something I can do? My dad is a doctor." "What is wrong with your uncle?" "Maybe if he needs to see a specialist or something, my dad could put in a good word to speed it up." Dark wondered for a minute if he should tell her something. It would be nice to talk to someone, a normal person, about some things. But if he allowed himself to say anything, there was a danger that one long string of things might come out of his mouth, each tied to the next like magician's handkerchiefs. The bits about burglary wouldn't impress a coffee-drinking doctor's daughter very much. And the bits about talking birds and taking a chalice from another girl with green eyes, that would just freak her out. "Nothing," he said eventually. "I don't know much about it." "Look, I'm sorry if I asked you things I shouldn't have asked," she said curtly, looking at her watch. "I better be going anyway." On the way home, Dark got a puncture. He was near the Brown River, and when he had it fixed, he leaned over the old humpback bridge for a while, turning the conversation over in his head and wishing he hadn't clammed up, wishing he'd made a chance to hold her hand on the way back to school, and wishing he'd parted with her on a less feeble note than "maybe" when she said, "See you around then." He felt dumb and useless. When he got home, he looked in on Connie. Helen was trying to get him to eat a spoon of yogurt. Dark's mum thought the good bacteria in yogurt would make most ailments better. The same man who Dark had once seen eat an entire leg of lamb was now so wasted that he could barely open his mouth. There was more yogurt on his beard than inside him. It was a bit disgusting, actually. His mum looked up and said, "There are fried mushrooms and potatoes on the pan beside the cooker, love." Dark closed the bedroom door and left the house. There was muck to clear from the cow yards. He put the scraper on Jenny and opened the throttle. It was one of his favourite jobs, reversing the perfect Massey 135 around tight corners at speed with muck flying off the wheels. He was very good at it. Brian arrived to do the milking and flagged him down. He said, "Jesus Christ, Arthur, you put the heart sideways in me. Take it handy, the brakes aren't great on that little girl. You'll end up in the slurry pit." In the evening the house was quieter. He sat with Connie for a while. Connie wasn't trying to ask anything more. He just looked at Dark with pain creasing the smile from his face. His favourite wind-up clock stood on the mantelpiece, tick-tocking so laboriously that it sounded like each second was going to be its last. He only became animated when Dark's mum said, "This is just crazy, we have to take you back to the hospital." He shook his head as fiercely as he was able. She called Dark into the kitchen. "We'll see how tonight goes, okay? After that, he's going whether he wants to or not." "Okay," said Dark. "Another thing I've been meaning to say to you," she said in a frail voice. "I don't know why I'm telling you now." Dark did not like the sound of this. He did not need any more things piled onto his head. Your Uncle Connie, has come to mean more to me than he did at first. Fine, said Dark, cutting her off, relieved that it was nothing more, but not wanting to hear a long explanation from her on this subject. She suggested that they take turns sitting up with Connie for the night, increasing the frequency at which they tried him with drinks and custards. Dark did not see what good that would do Connie. He didn't want to just sit there looking at him, but he couldn't argue with her when there was a shake in her voice and tears not far away. Another night without a visit to the rat. The next morning, Dark was quite disorganised when he's setting out for school. He was 2 miles along the road when he realised he had forgotten lunch again and he had no money. Days went even slower when he was hungry, and so he turned back intending to look for some coins. As he came around the last curve on the driveway, an alarming sight stopped him. There was the red pickup parked at the front door. There was Salty coming out of the house. Salty was the one neighbour who never visited when Collie was well, and if Connie had still been able to talk, Dark was pretty sure he wouldn't be visiting now. Even in the cold morning air, his shirt was open and he had some kind of gold medallion swinging from his skinny neck. Dark's mum came out into the front door. As he opened the car door with the Salty Entertainment Limited sticker, he said, "All this so soon after the loss of Sean. Such a nice, sensitive guy he was. Remember now, Helen, give me a bell when you need any help whatsoever." After she closed the door, he spotted Dark approaching. He waited, then he winked and said, "Well," neither a greeting nor a question. "Shawnee Sprogg, still hanging about, I know it." No doubt remained in Dark's mind from that one look. Salty knew about the shop, and he was letting Dark know that he knew, and that he was just biding his time. "Yous all have a great day now, you hear?" he said in a slightly American overlay that his Kerry accent had acquired since the business had started. He got in the pickup and drove slowly out past the yard, making a point of looking all around him as he drove. He had done his very best to ensure that it was not going to be a good day for anyone in that house. Dark went in. He didn't say anything to his mum about why she had invited Salty in. He never said an angry word to his mother, any more than she had to him. And he never would. But she must have seen it in his face. She said, I know, Arthur. I know the history, and I know Connie is not his biggest fan. Don't look at me like that. He called. I didn't invite him. And he is offering help. And frankly, we are not in a strong position to turn down any of that." Dark loved his mum more than anything, but sometimes he just didn't get her. Dark went down to the back room, hoping Connie would be asleep and maybe would not have heard Salty's voice in his house. But the eyes exploding with anger told him otherwise. Of course, that was the main purpose of the visit, just to let Connie hear him chatting happily with Helen in Connie's kitchen, expressing good wishes for a speedy recovery for Connie, while trying to aggravate him into faster decline, leaving no doubt that he was scheming again about how to take the land and all. And Dark would be powerless to stop him. Dark sat next to Connie and whispered, "Don't worry about that guy." Connie raised an eyebrow. Tried Dark. "I'm making progress, with Moira Fada and all that." Connie's eyes calmed. He looked at Dark and gave a faint nod. Dark kissed his mam and set out for school again. He had lied to Connie and made his mother feel he was angry with her. The only two people in the world who cared a single thing about him. Not a good start to the day. Ciara was not in school. He found himself hoping during first lesson she'd walk in late. Of course she was never late. But she was never absent either, not even when she had a cold. That was why he kept expecting to see her. At first break he couldn't deal with it anymore and set off. Since his mum would be home today, he couldn't go straight there. He had to kill time. He went to the river. It was too bright for fishing, but he took his rod out of his bag anyway. He somehow felt less guilty for idling if he was fiddling at the same time. He went to his spot. It was one of the hollows that Connie had shown him in his first days here. He remembered what Connie had called it now, a Fullacht Fian, an ancient cooking place. According to Connie, the pit had to be filled with water. That's why they are always next to a river. Then the people light a big fire alongside. They roll red-hot stones from the fire into the water to boil it and slow cook whatever meal they have to share with the gathering. It was a very long time since this dent had been anyone's cooking pit, but it was very sheltered sitting in there. Once he had the rod dangling in the river, he could lie back comfortably and be very snug even on a cold April day. The river was high after all the rain, but didn't come up to his part of the bank. He nodded off. He woke some time later and folded the rod and ready to go back to the road. He was thinking he maybe had time to drop in on cash for a while. He stood and was brushing old burdocks off his jacket when he distinctly heard a creaky, "What ails you?" Dark nearly fell into the river. He looked around and could see no one, but a heron had stopped, wading in the shallower water at the far bank, and had the side of her head turned towards him. It couldn't be. He waited, but the question wasn't repeated. He thought he was finally losing his fingernail grip on reality. Everything else peculiar in his life had happened only in the darkness of night when, as the old man said, the countryside was free and other forces roamed. He would somehow have preferred, despite his diversionary quest for Lan Marie or Nubledy, if his daylight normality could remain solid and intact. But he decided to answer the invisible questioner because he had little or nothing to lose. "Nothing at all," he said shakily. "But my uncle is on the ball of his back in bed after something bit him on his ankle." Only the noise of the rushing brown water came back at him. He was standing in his pit, feeling even more stupid for confusing the creaking of a willow bough for a voice. Then the bird spoke again. "Black or purple teeth marks? What sort of form is he in?" He's been better. He's been in better form," said Dark, amazed. "He lies there wasting away and groaning. Purple," he added, "from a little mouth. A big mouth, in fact, on a very little head," said the bird, still inspecting him with one side of her head and then the other. "What's going to happen to him? The Enchanted Rat? He'll be grand, as happy as Larry." "No, Connie, my uncle." "Oh, him," she said in the same flat tones, glancing for a moment at the passing trout. "He'll die." Dark said nothing. Even if she saw he was shocked, she added no softness to her tone. "The curse that was delivered to him by the little four-legged rascal was that he may die roaring." "He's not roaring," was the ridiculous thing that Dark heard himself say. "Well, he should be. That is the most excruciating of poisons. From the minute it's in your veins, you are supposed to roar. He must have a far higher tolerance for pain than is usual among your kind." "He keeps calling your name," said Dark dejectedly. "He must have thought you could help." "Does he?" she said, cocking her head suddenly. "Does he indeed?" "Yeah, Long Moira. He must have thought you'd help him. Sorry to have disturbed you." "Hold on there, bucko. I didn't say I couldn't help him. You said he'll die. That's about all you needed to say." "Did I?" "Of course. We'll all die," she said, gabbling like a turkey. There is just the question of when. So, is there some help you can give a man who is in such a great admirer of yours? Dark tried, remembering something of Moira Father's love for flattery. Admirer? Yeah, he was always talking how Long Moira is the most elegant creature ever built, lied Dark. Well, I'd gladly tell you all I know to help a fine man of such discerning tastes, she said. There's a canker on the bark of some old crab trees, an hour's walk further up this river. If they are fed to him along with black paste, he may well outlive you, me, or the enemy who put this upon him. Black paste? That's part I can't help you with, she said, a genuine note of apology in her voice. There's another party you will have to talk to about that. Nob lady, tried Dark. Who? What? Said the bird. You wouldn't want to let her hear you calling her Nobby. Sorry, who then? They call her the noble lady. Though frankly, I never saw why, said the heron huffily. Lady, indeed. What kind of lady has no feathers? They say her kind never die. That, of course, means they are never born either. So answer me this. Does that not also conclusively prove that there is no breeding and no rearing on this fine lady? Okay, said Dark, avoiding the heron's resentful question and entirely forgetting that this gave him no more information. He was too keen to ask the other question. So, who was it that sent the rat to deliver the curse to Connie? Aha! The wrong question. Careful in all he has been. He has allowed himself to ask the wrong question, said the long bird, as if she had just won a competition. And those were the last words she spoke. Although in truth he was very little further than he had been when leaving in the morning, he had at least overturned his lies to Connie. When he got home, he went in to talk to him again. You are going to have to eat more custard, he said. From now on, I'll stuff it with those painkillers. We need you to hang in a while longer. I need just a bit more time. Connie nodded, but Dark could see the resignation on his face. He had guessed that Dark had been only trying to humour him this morning. Truly, he said. I collected the stuff from Moira Father. He took a bit of the crab tree canker from his pocket, and now I only have to get the black paste from the noble lady. Connie's eyes widened, believing him now. Dark didn't think it would be good to mention that he had completely screwed up the chance to find out from the heron who the noble lady actually was. That night, he persuaded his mam that she needed sleep, that he would get enough rest in the armchair next to Connie. As soon as she was gone, he told Connie he was heading out for the rat. Connie would understand. First, though, he had another thing to do, a thing that Connie definitely would not approve of. Since the visit that morning, Dark had had an aching fear that Salty had found the secret vault. He had to go and check, even though Connie had warned him to keep it in his mind, but never let his eyes lead another to it. He looked around the dark yards to try to make sure that nobody else was watching. Then he went quickly into the long tractor shed and bolted the door behind him. He didn't even turn on the lights. He used the faint light of his phone to avoid stumbling over drums of oil, gearboxes, and the compressors. He quickly pulled back the crate for storing black plastic and inspected the safe that was sunk in the concrete below. It did not look like it had been opened in a long time. He ought to have been reassured, but as he had gone this far, of course, he decided to carry on. From his inner pocket he retrieved the keys that he had sneaked from the top of Connie's wardrobe. He opened the two locks and put his hand inside the old gun safe. Wrapped in cheesecloth, he could clearly make out the reassuring contours and intricate designs of the scabbards. He felt the gem in the centre of the shield. Suddenly he could see clearly. He could see that this was the centre of everything. These old things were what made Connie so sure he could save the rest of his old friend's possessions. They were also what drew Salty into their lives. Touching them should have been all the reassurance Dark needed. He couldn't deny now that when he took them out it was only for his own pleasure. to set his eyes on them again, to again be reassured of the familiar dents whose stories he knew. He laid them on the floor and gazed at them, the items that had bridged his worlds and that reassured him that he was not insane. He took the worn handle of the sword and pulled it part way from the prized bronze scabbard. Tools that had passed from generation to generation. Then he felt a cold breeze. The door of the tractor shed opened behind him. He must not have pulled the bolt properly. He could see only the dark outside. He was certain someone was looking at him. He switched his light phone off to level things, but still his eyes could not make out a silhouette. As fast as he was able to, he felt for the clothes and rewrapped the property of the ancients, locked it in a safe, and put everything back the best way he could. He left the shed and locked it behind him. Later, in the Rat, Dark took the goblet from Matha, but didn't drink from it straight away. He wanted to know. Surely someone there could give him a direct answer. Please, he said, can anyone here tell me who the noble lady is? As usual, all he got in reply was other questions. Why do you want to know? Growled the far Jarek, hanging from a high branch of a yew tree. For my uncle, said Dark, abruptly. How is your uncle faring? Asked the old man. He is not well, that is why I'm asking, said Dark, feeling suddenly angry and frustrated. Is none of you willing to help me? Settle down, son, said Canaan. Dark sat. The old man spoke to him. You are a good young man, and true as any I have met. Believe me, you are surrounded by friends here. If I was so true, I would be in the house sitting with my dying uncle and not escaping down here to travel in some bloody other world or whatever it is I really am, blurted Dark. We can see all your torment and nobody here wishes to upset you further, came another voice. It was the old druid Droleen, in wren form. Dark appreciated his voice. He knew that Droleen did not willingly visit the fort of the little people. They were of the view that big people should not dabble in their arts. Magic was what had been left to them. They could turn on a druid without excuse. The old man must have called him to be here. Maybe they really were watching over him. Droleen continued. Believe me, nobody here wants your uncle to suffer more under this spell or to lose the battle with this curse. It is just that some truths you have to seek, but the most important truths have to come to you. You are doing everything right. Why that did not anger Dark further, he did not know. He should have been angry that they wouldn't just tell him what he needed to know instead of weaving a vagueness of words around his head. Maybe he was too tired. He drank from Mathane's chalice. The old man's words then took him away from the worries into another person's world.